Hello, I'm Joanne May, and we will be painting a winter landscape in watercolor today. The first thing I'm doing after taping the paper down, which I'm using 140-pound cold press watercolor paper that's 100% cotton, is to wet the sky. So I have the sky area wet now, and I'm dropping in the lightest colors first, starting with a bright yellow, azo yellow, and azo orange. And I will be adding some pinks into this sunset. It now is going to show where the sun is, just at the very edge of the horizon. Once I have some of that color in, I'm dropping now in sort of randomly into the blue sky. It's going to be a rather dark sky, so I'm using ultramarine blue and burnt sienna mixture for some of those grays. Now I'm going back and adding more blue up in the top part so that down near the sun it will be a little bit lighter, and up near the top of the sky it will be a little bit darker. Tipping my paper because it is so wet, and I don't want it to bleed down into the yellow too much, so I'm taking off the excess water to avoid some blooms. The next step now is to add some color to the snow. When there's a bright sun that's low in the sky, the shadows will come across in a very long distance across the snow, and there will also be a reflection in the snow of some of those colors in the sky. Mainly some blues and purples. Next, now I have added the reflection of the sun and the sunset colors into this river that is flowing in the center and foreground of the painting. I have added some edges to the river in that same mixture of ultramarine blue and burnt sienna, with just a little touch of pink so that it turns a little purplish, and I dried it. The next step then is to add the background mountains. There's just a low mountain on the right side and a little bit of more of a foreground mountain on the left. This is a same mixture, ultramarine blue and burnt sienna, but in a very dark, thick version, so that it will be a shadow. It will look like a shadow of the night sky on these trees. Right now they don't look too much like trees. I'll be adding a little bit more detail to those and washing out some of the color because I don't want it to be so contrasting from the sky. I want it to look more in the background, so I take some of that dark pigment away in just a little bit. The next thing then is to create a little bit of interest on the left side of the landscape horizon line, which will be the rooftop of a house and some pine trees around a little farm that's evidently in the background. It's not very detailed because we don't want the eye to travel straight to that area. The main focus is the sunset and the water in front in the foreground. Now some tall trees will go in, and as you see me adding the paint for the trees, I'm using I think it's a quarter, no, that must be a half-inch flat brush, and I am first putting in the dark side of the tree and then adding just plain water with my round brush to create the effect of the sun washing the right side of the tree. And you'll see me add a little more darkness to the left side again of this tree trunk. So this is just the basic shape of the tree. I'll be adding some other trees, and then later I'll go in with a much finer brush and add the branches. This mixture of paint is the same. That ultramarine blue and burnt sienna is just a magical combination, because you can get, with more burnt sienna, you get a more brownish color. With more ultramarine, you get it a little bit on the bluish side. And the exact even mixture of half and half makes the most beautiful gray, or in its thicker version, almost black. That's a little bit what I was going for with that background mountain. Here I'm using with a little bit more burnt sienna, so these trees in the foreground look a little browner than what is in the sky. The sky is more the bluish color and some gray, and the background is more that even mixture. It's always fun to play with mixtures of paints. So many people do swatches. I've rarely done swatches. I like to just play with it on the painting. There's so many possibilities, and contrary to what you might hear about watercolor, things can change quite a lot as you're painting. You don't have to worry about putting something down and thinking, oh no, that doesn't look right. You can always go in and wash something over the top of it. That's the beauty of the transparency of the watercolor. But also, if you have good paper, rubbing out is possible, and of course that depends too on whether you're using a staining paint or one that's more granulating. Ultramarine is definitely a granulating color, and you can see that up close if you look where those dark blues of the sky show up. You'll see it at the end of this video, more of a close-up of just how the pigments settle into the pores of the paper, and they make just such a beautiful expression of that, what that sky can look like. Okay, so the trees are basically in. I've got the trunks where I want them now, and I'm going over to the right side here to add some grasses, bushes across in the midground and background, and also a little bit of a shadow of the mountain on the right hand side. I'll add more to that in a little bit. It's not quite dramatic enough. I wanted to really play with the light and the shadows in this painting, because otherwise it can be kind of boring to just look at a snow scene. I love the sky colors. That's the other really delightful thing about doing a sunset, but I enjoyed adding the longer shadows. I think I kept going back and adding more length and more length to those grasses, the shadows of the grasses in the background and middle ground, and also into this stream. You'll see this bush that I add to the left of the stream is going to have a reflection in the water, and I wanted also the shadow of the bush on the snow, and I just kept adding more length to those shadows, long shadows with the sun way down, almost ready to disappear at the horizon line. So now I'm working this river. I changed the shape of it just a little bit. I didn't have enough sweep to the left in that foreground shape. It was a little bit too centered and a little bit too boring, so I added this sweep line of the left bank of the river. And I also didn't think, it's amazing how much watercolor washes out after it dries, and I didn't think I had enough color to reflect the sunset into this water. So I'm adding more yellow, more orange, more pink, and now I'm playing with that distant river disappearing into what will be a bush. So I'm not too worried about how that looks right now. It doesn't quite work the way it looks now, but the bush will cover that area. Adding a little more darkness on the left bank, and that also is my favorite combo of ultramarine and burnt sienna. And I'm going to be also adding more on the right side and getting a little bit more interesting shape to the right bank. You see that the snow looks like it's beginning to mound up a little bit at the point of the river the river's edge. But I wanted to exaggerate that a little bit more by adding more shadows into the snow, which indicates the shape of that bank. And there we go. We're getting a little bit more interest on that bank. A little different shape. This flat brush is not my usual brush to use, and I wanted to actually give it a go. I've seen people successfully use a flat brush for a whole painting. I'm obviously not using it for everything, but it really was quite effective to get a sharp edge line on the bank and to do it as a sideways vertical lines, successive lines to make the trees. So I think I'll be using it more in my painting. Now I have my favorite brush. This is a Chinese calligraphy brush, and it's the smallest version that I could find. It holds an amazing amount of water. I almost never run out of water using this brush, and it also has the finest point on it, so I can get these grasses so easily crossing over each other, sort of a wild looking bush leaning a little bit toward the river. And I'm using more burnt sienna with a tiny touch of ultramarine blue in that mixture for the bush, so it looks quite brown there. And now I want to darken it up, so I'm touching into my neutral tint, which is an interesting color. It's something that is, when mixed with another color, gives it the other color a darker shade of that whatever it is, and that's why it's called neutral. It can affect any color of the paint, and it can make it just simply darker. So that worked really well for this bush, where I wanted to put something significantly darker at the base of it to create a bit of a shadow. So I had quite a lot of shadow there, and then it dried and it's kind of disappeared again. So I do go back in a little bit to get more of those long shadows coming from the bush and from these trees on the left. And now I'm working on the rays of the sun that are reflected off of the snow in the background. It's just fun to do snow. I don't know. I guess I said a little bit ago it was boring to look at snow because all it is white paper. You don't really paint snow. You just paint what's different than the snow around it, sort of negative painting the snow. But it's super fun to think about what you are reflecting from the sky and from shadows of trees and bushes into the snow, and also with this riverbank. How does it connect with the snow? What sorts of shadows are created by the shapes of the edge of the snowbanks and the shape of the edge of the waterfront there? Now you see much more blue going in. I thought this needed to reflect the sky color a little bit more than it had. It was looking more brown, and it needed to have more blue in it. And I just left it that way. I look at this point in the painting process, and I think, wow, that's really an ugly river. It just looks like those blobs are not going to look river-like. But I think I knew, I'm not sure I knew for sure, but I thought that I had put enough blue in there, and sometimes fiddling with it makes it worse. So I thought I'll just let it dry. It's not quite dry here. I'm even putting my hand right over the top of it. It's not coming off on my skin, so it's sinking into the paper. And in just a little bit, you'll see that I'll add some rocks to the edges of the river, and it all turns out pretty nicely to look like a reflection from that sunset. So this is my really small fine liner brush, and it is a rigger brush that I think it's a number 2. The number 2 rigger is pretty small, and it has long hairs, but not fat at all in the barrel of it. It's a very thin brush, so that works really well for doing those branches. And I only did the branches on the left trees, but not the ones in the foreground and the ones to the right, because I wanted to distinguish the colors of those two types of trees. You see now where I'm actually lifting out some of the color to make the snow pop a little bit and look like around those white areas are these long shadows. So I think that was fairly successful here. And then I touched in some of the darkness where I wanted more of the shadow effect. It's sort of a mottled look when you have a bunch of trees in the background. This is indicating where the light is shining through those trees. Now some darker burnt sienna, a little bit of burnt umber mixture in with this as well to give a little more dimension to these branches. And now adding the branches to the trees in the center foreground and on the right. And those are a little bit more grayish. So when you see the final painting, you can distinguish. This angle's a little hard to tell, but the branches on these right trees in the center tree are more gray and less brown. So I didn't use very many colors. It doesn't take a lot, and it keeps it more cohesive if you continue to use the same colors in different mixtures. It looks like the painting actually makes sense rather than dipping into all those other shades. You see how many colors I have in my palette and mixing those. I never clean off my palette because I know that I can use that palette dirt for something at some point. I shouldn't say never. Once in a while I clean off one of the areas, one of the squares, so that I can mix something fresh, but most of the time what's there is usable. So here are the rocks. Now they look really fake going in, as dark as they are, but I knew that I wanted to lift out in some textured ways some angles of the rocks. Rocks sometimes have flat tops, sometimes they're rounded, and so I used a credit card to just scrape the paint away, and I touched up underneath so that some of the rocks had some shadows. Pardon me. And then I have added more blue on the edges of the water. And here's where this shadow of the bush is going in. Now, it looked great up close, but from a distance I looked back at it and I could hardly see this shadow, so I thought there needed to be some other defining way of seeing that. So here it is. It's adding some snow into the base of it and a little bit up through the branches that are carrying a little bit of snow. So that helped it to pop. And here it is. You see the shadows much more easily here with this straight-on photograph, and all of the little pieces have come together. You see the shadows on the sides of the river. I'm very pleased with how it turned out. Thanks for watching.